The restaurant was always bustling with energy, a place where the rich and powerful gathered to enjoy the finest food and wine. The decor was elegant, with sparkling chandeliers hanging above and soft classical music playing in the background. It was the kind of place where everyone wanted to be seen, where deals were made over dinner, and where status was as important as the meal itself. Among the crowd of well-dressed guests and expensive suits was Claire, a young woman who worked as a waitress. She wasn't part of this elite world. She didn't have the fancy clothes or the privilege that so many of the restaurant's patrons flaunted. Instead, Claire wore a simple black uniform and a warm, professional smile as she moved swiftly from table to table, serving drinks and taking orders. To the guests, Claire was just another face in the background, a waitress who was there to ensure their dining experience was flawless. Most of the time, they didn't even look at her twice. She was used to it. This wasn't her world. She didn't mind. She had a job to do, and she did it well. But behind the smile and the polite gestures, Claire had a secret. While everyone else in the restaurant was focused on their conversations about money, power, and social status, Claire often found herself distracted by something much simpler. It was the piano. The restaurant had recently added a grand piano in the corner of the dining room. It was a beautiful instrument with polished wood and ivory keys that shimmered under the soft light. At first, it had only been a decorative piece, adding to the sophisticated atmosphere of the restaurant. The piano sat there, mostly unused, while the background music played softly from speakers hidden in the walls. Claire had always loved music. She wasn't just a waitress. She had spent years learning how to play the piano. She had taken lessons as a child, and by the time she was a teenager, she had become quite skilled. But life had taken a different path, and her dreams of becoming a concert pianist had never materialized. Instead, she found herself in this restaurant, serving meals to people who had no idea what she was capable of. She never mentioned her musical background to anyone. It was something she kept to herself, a part of her that seemed so far removed from the life she was living now. As she moved around the room, taking orders and clearing plates, Claire's eyes would often drift to the piano. She imagined herself sitting there, her fingers dancing over the keys, playing the melodies that swirled in her mind. But that was just a dream. The piano was for someone else, someone who belonged in this world of luxury and elegance. Claire didn't belong there. She wasn't important enough to play that piano. The restaurant was busy tonight as usual. The elite crowd filled every seat, and the air was thick with the sound of clinking glasses and polite conversation. Claire moved quickly between tables, making sure every guest had what they needed. She tried to ignore the piano, but it was hard. It called to her, its silent keys mocking her as she passed by. As she delivered a glass of wine to a table in the corner, she overheard a conversation that caught her attention. A well-dressed man was speaking to the manager of the restaurant, a man Claire had only seen from a distance. He was tall, with a commanding presence, and he spoke with the kind of confidence that came from years of power and wealth. "I hear you've added a piano," the man said, "but where's the entertainment? This place needs more than just background music. It needs something live, something exciting." The manager nodded, his face anxious. "We've been looking for a pianist, but it's been difficult to find someone who can fit in with the atmosphere we're going for." The man scoffed. "This place has the potential to be something extraordinary. If you want to cater to the right crowd, you need to have more than just good food. You need to create an experience." Claire kept her head down, but the words stuck with her. The restaurant needed a pianist. She could be that pianist. The thought was crazy, of course. She wasn't supposed to be in the spotlight. She was just the waitress. But the idea gnawed at her. She had spent so many years playing in the shadows, never letting anyone hear her music. Maybe this was her chance. She shook the thought away, telling herself it was impossible. She wasn't someone who could perform in front of a crowd. She wasn't trained for that kind of attention. It was easier to stay in the background, to remain invisible, but the thought wouldn't leave her. Later that evening, as the restaurant started to quiet down, the manager made an announcement to the staff. "We've had a change of plans. Our regular pianist has canceled for the evening, and we're looking for a replacement. Does anyone here play?" The room fell silent. Claire's heart raced in her chest. She stood frozen, her hands gripping the edge of a tray. Could she do it? Could she walk up to that piano and play in front of all those people? She wasn't sure, but a strange sense of urgency washed over her, and before she could think too much about it, She found herself stepping forward. "I can play," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The manager turned to her, surprised. "You can?" Claire nodded, her heart pounding in her ears. She didn't know why she had said it. It just felt like the right thing to do. She had spent so many years hiding her talent, keeping it locked away inside of her. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. The manager looked her up and down, taking in her uniform and the simple, unremarkable way she looked. Then he smiled, perhaps thinking she was joking, but also perhaps seeing an opportunity. "Well, go ahead then. It's your chance to shine." With trembling hands, Claire walked toward the piano, her mind racing. She had never performed in front of such a large crowd before. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing. This could be her moment. She sat down at the piano, her fingers brushing the keys. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something magical to happen. Claire took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and then began to play. The first few notes were tentative, almost shy, but soon her fingers found their rhythm. The soft sound of the piano filled the room, cutting through the noise and chatter of the guests. At first, no one seemed to notice, but slowly, as the melody grew more confident, the room began to quiet. People turned their heads, surprised to hear such a beautiful sound coming from the piano. The elegant music seemed to fill the space, creating a contrast to the usual chatter. Claire's fingers moved more confidently now, the music flowing from her with a sense of ease she hadn't expected. She wasn't just playing the notes, she was telling a story, expressing feelings through each chord and melody. It was as if the piano had come alive beneath her touch. For a moment, Claire forgot about everything. The guests, the pressure, the fear. She was just playing, lost in the music, her fingers dancing across the keys as if nothing else mattered. As Claire continued to play, the room seemed to shift. The usual murmur of conversation began to fade, replaced by the soft melodic sound of the piano. The guests at the tables closest to the piano leaned in, their attention slowly moving away from their meals and business talk. The atmosphere, once filled with chatter and the clink of silverware, now became quiet and contemplative. For the first time that evening, Claire felt the weight of every eye in the room on her. At first it felt uncomfortable, almost overwhelming. She had never performed in front of such a crowd, and the last thing she wanted was to mess up. But the more she played, the more the music seemed to take over. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was an expression, a feeling that she was sharing with everyone in the room. It felt as if the music was connecting her to them, breaking down the invisible barriers that often separated the staff from the patrons. The manager, who had been watching her from a distance, stood by the bar with a surprised look on his face. He had expected the usual background music, something soft and pleasant, but nothing that would capture the attention of the guests. Yet here Claire was, playing with such grace and passion that it was impossible to ignore her. He had known she was quiet, but this was something he hadn't expected from a waitress. As the music flowed from Claire's hands, she could see the reactions of the guests. Some were simply listening, their faces softening as they let the melody wash over them. Others were whispering to each other, clearly impressed by what they were hearing. And a few guests, the ones who had come to the restaurant seeking a quiet evening of conversation, looked around, confused by the sudden change in the atmosphere. Claire kept playing, not letting herself get distracted by the glances or the whispers. The piece she had chosen was one of her favorites, a composition she had learned years ago but had never shared with anyone. It was a song that spoke to her, that captured the feeling of longing and hope. She played with a depth that came from her heart, pouring every emotion she had into each note. It wasn't about perfection. It was about making the music real, about letting herself be vulnerable in front of these strangers. The longer she played, the more she noticed how the guests were reacting. There was something almost magical about the way the room had changed. The usual noise, the loud conversations, the clinking of glasses, all of it had been replaced with an almost reverent silence. It was as if everyone was waiting for the next note, the next moment of beauty to unfold. At one table, a well-dressed woman who had been talking animatedly to her companion stopped mid-sentence. She looked up at the piano, her eyes narrowing as she tried to place the source of the sound. Her lips parted, surprised by the skill and depth of the performance. The man sitting next to her, initially too busy checking his phone, had also paused. drawn in by the unexpected beauty of the music. A few tables away, a couple in their 50s exchanged glances, their conversation forgotten. The man who had been discussing the latest business trends with his wife turned his head toward the piano, his expression softening as the melody played. His wife reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. They both listened in silence, wrapped up in the delicate beauty that filled the room. The manager stepped closer to Claire, watching her intently. He had never seen anything like this before. The restaurant, known for its high-end dining and exclusive clientele, had never had a moment like this. People came for the food, the service, the status, but now they were experiencing something entirely different. Something raw, something human. He had always viewed Claire as just another employee, someone who helped keep the restaurant running smoothly. But now, as he watched her play, he realized he had underestimated her. There was something about her, something more than just a waitress. She was an artist in her own right. When Claire finished the piece, the room remained still for a few moments. There was no clapping, no applause, just an intense silence that seemed to hang in the air. It was as though the music had created a space where time had stopped, where everyone was caught in a shared moment. Claire sat there, her hand still resting lightly on the keys, waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. Then, slowly, as if on cue, the sound of clapping filled the room. It started at one table, a couple of guests who had clearly been moved by the performance. Their applause was hesitant at first, unsure of how to respond to such a surprising moment, but soon others joined in. The applause grew louder, spreading like wildfire across the room. The clapping didn't stop for several moments, and Claire found herself flushing with embarrassment. She hadn't expected this reaction. She was just playing the piano. She didn't need applause. But the applause was not just for the performance, it was for the moment she had created. The crowd had been swept away by her music, by the vulnerability and authenticity that she had shared. It wasn't just a song. It was a part of her. And for the first time, people were seeing her not just as a waitress, but as someone with something valuable to offer. The manager stepped forward, a wide grin on his face. "That was incredible," he said, his voice filled with awe. Claire smiled shyly, not used to such praise. "I didn't know you could play like that," he added. "That was unexpected." Claire's face turned red, but she felt a small sense of pride stir inside her. She hadn't expected much, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. "Thank you," she said softly, standing up from the piano. The applause was still ringing in her ears, and she wasn't sure what to do next. The manager cleared his throat, his smile broadening. "You know," he began, "we've been looking for a pianist to perform here regularly, someone who can elevate the experience for our guests. How would you feel about playing a few nights a week?" The offer took Claire by surprise. She had never imagined that something like this could happen. She had always loved playing the piano, but performing in front of strangers? That was a world she had never thought she'd step into. "I'm not sure," she began, her voice trailing off as doubt crept into her mind. The manager smiled. "I understand it's a big step, but you have something special. It would be an honor to have you perform here." Claire stood there for a moment, her mind racing. She had always kept her talent hidden, afraid to take the next step. But now, in this unexpected moment, the possibility of sharing her music with others felt right. She looked around the room, seeing the faces of the guests who had been moved by her performance. For the first time, she felt seen, not just as a waitress, but as a person with something to offer, something that mattered. Taking a deep breath, Claire nodded. "I'll think about it." The manager smiled again, clearly pleased with her response. "Take your time, but I think you could really do something incredible here." As she walked away from the piano, Claire couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement building inside her. This was the beginning of something new, something that she hadn't even dared to dream of. She had taken a chance, stepped out of her comfort zone, and shared something personal with the world. And in doing so, she had changed the way people saw her, not just as the waitress, but as a musician with a talent that was undeniable. As the night wore on, Claire continued to serve the guests, but her mind was elsewhere. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone who had the power to change the atmosphere of a room, to take people on a journey through her music. And for the first time, she felt a sense of possibility that she hadn't known before. This was just the beginning. The days that followed Claire's impromptu performance felt like a whirlwind. The restaurant, once a place where she had worked in the background, had become something entirely different for her. She no longer felt like just another face in the crowd, the invisible waitress who served meals and cleaned tables. Now, she was someone who had the power to change the entire atmosphere of the room, someone whose music had left an impact on the people who dined there. Claire had agreed to perform regularly, but she still wasn't sure how she felt about it. Every night when she arrived at work, she found herself nervous. Her heart would race as she approached the piano, wondering if she could recreate the magic of her first performance. The doubts crept in, as they always did when she was about to step outside her comfort zone. Yet as soon as her fingers touched the keys, all her anxiety seemed to fade away. The music became her anchor, and for those few moments she felt completely in control. The soft melodies she played had a calming effect on the room, and it wasn't long before she realized that people weren't just listening to her, they were experiencing something. The music had a way of connecting people, of making them feel something deeper than the usual small talk and polite conversation. The guests who had once ignored her were now paying attention, some even asking her to play specific songs. The manager, who had been hesitant at first, now encouraged her to play more often. He had noticed the change in the atmosphere when Claire played. The restaurant, which had once been known only for its high-end food and exclusive clientele, now had something else to offer: an experience. Claire wasn't just a waitress anymore. She had become an essential part of the evening's experience. Guests would arrive, take their seats, and expect to hear the gentle strains of the piano. It had become part of the charm of the restaurant, something that set it apart from the other places in the city. And it was all thanks to Claire. One evening, as she sat at the piano playing a piece she had learned years ago, Claire couldn't help but notice the reactions of the guests around her. At one table, a couple sat in silence, their heads turned toward her as they listened to the music. The woman leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, both of them lost in the moment. It was rare to see such a connection between two people in a place like this, where business deals and social status were usually the focus. Across the room, a businessman paused mid-conversation to listen, his usual smug expression replaced by a look of contemplation. Claire had never seen him so still, so focused on anything other than his own agenda. And as the final notes of the piece faded into the air, he looked up at her, nodding in appreciation. It wasn't much, but it was enough to let Claire know that her music was reaching people, touching them in a way that words alone couldn't. After that night, Claire started to feel a shift within herself. She wasn't just playing because she had been asked to. She was playing because it was what she loved to do. And as she continued to perform, she began to realize something important. Music had always been her way of expressing herself, of sharing a piece of her soul with the world. The piano had always been there for her, a constant source of comfort and expression. Now it was becoming something more. It was a way for her to connect with people in a way she never thought possible. One evening, as Claire finished a song, she was approached by a woman who had been sitting at one of the tables near the piano. The woman was older, her hair silver and neatly styled, her outfit elegant but simple. She had been watching Claire play for the past few nights, and her eyes were filled with admiration. "That was beautiful," the woman said, her voice soft and genuine. "You have such a gift. I can tell that music is a part of you. It's not just a performance for you, it's something much deeper." Claire smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her. "Thank you," she replied quietly. "I've always loved music," the woman nodded. "It's clear. You play with so much emotion. It's rare to see someone who truly connects with their music in such a way. You should think about doing this more. People need to hear what you have to offer." Claire was taken aback. She had never thought about it like that. She had always kept her music to herself, never imagining that others would see it as something more than just a hobby. But this woman, with her kind words, had made her see it differently. Maybe this wasn't just a job anymore. Maybe, just maybe, she could turn her passion into something more. The next night, as Claire sat at the piano, her hands trembling slightly, she decided to try something different. She had been playing songs that were familiar to her, songs she knew well, but tonight she wanted to step out of her comfort zone. She wanted to play something that felt more personal, something that came from her heart. As her fingers touched the keys, she began to play a song she had written herself, a piece that was simple yet full of emotion. It wasn't a perfect composition. The notes were raw, a little uneven in places, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that it came from her. She poured all of her feelings into the music, letting it speak for her in a way that words never could. The room seemed to fall into a hushed silence as the guests around her listened. The melody was soft at first, almost hesitant, but as it grew, so did the intensity of the emotion behind it. Claire didn't care if it was perfect. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just wanted to express herself. As the final note played, Claire felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had shared something deeply personal, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of pride in what she had done. She looked up to see that the room was still, the guests all caught up in the moment. There was no applause, no immediate reaction, but there didn't need to be. The silence was enough. For the next few nights, Claire continued to play her own compositions, each piece a reflection of how she felt in that moment. And with each performance, she felt herself growing more confident. The guests, too, began to notice. They were no longer just coming to hear background music. They were coming to hear Claire play. The manager, who had once seen Claire only as a waitress, now saw her as an artist. He had become her biggest supporter, encouraging her to play more, to take chances with her music. He knew that the restaurant had something special, something that set it apart from every other high-end dining experience in the city. And it was all thanks to Claire. But despite the praise and attention, Claire remained humble. She never saw herself as a professional pianist, just someone who loved to play. But as the weeks passed, she started to realize that she wasn't just playing for the guests anymore. She was playing for herself, for the joy of expressing her emotions through the music. One evening, as she finished a particularly emotional piece, Claire noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was the woman who had spoken to her a few nights ago, the one who had complimented her music. The woman was standing near the bar, her eyes fixed on Claire as she played. After the performance, the woman approached her once again. "You're really something," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "I hope you know how special your music is. I think it's time for you to take the next step." Claire looked at the woman, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?" The woman smiled. "You've got something incredible. It's time to share it with the world." As Claire looked around at the guests who had gathered to listen to her, she realized that the world might not be as far away as she had once thought. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to step into the spotlight and let the world hear her music. The weeks passed and Claire continued to perform at the restaurant. Her nightly performances had become a regular part of the evening, something that the guests had come to expect. The piano, once just a decoration, had now become an integral part of the restaurant's atmosphere. And Claire, the woman who had once only been seen as a waitress, was now recognized as an artist. Each night as Claire sat at the piano, her fingers would brush the keys with a sense of calm, her nervousness slowly fading away. The guests who had once ignored her completely now watched her with rapt attention. She had come to realize that this was no longer just about playing songs. It was about sharing something personal, something that only she could express. Music for Claire had always been a way to escape, to express emotions that words could never fully capture. Now it was her way of connecting with the world. But even with the growing recognition, Claire still had doubts. She wasn't sure if she was truly ready for what might come next. She had always kept her dreams small, never allowing herself to believe that she could make a living from her music. She didn't see herself as a professional musician, just a woman who played for the joy of it. But the more she played, the more she realized that maybe, just maybe, her music was worth something. It was one particularly quiet evening when the shift in her thoughts began. The restaurant was not as crowded as usual, and the usual hum of conversation had settled into a comfortable quiet. Claire was playing a soft, flowing piece when she noticed a man sitting at a table near the bar, his attention fixed entirely on her. He was older than most of the guests, perhaps in his late 50s, and wore a dark suit, the kind of man who looked like he belonged in a place like this. But there was something different about him. His eyes weren't just admiring the music, they were studying it, taking in every note as though he understood the deeper meaning behind the melody. As she finished the piece, the man stood up and walked over to her. He was tall with graying hair and a kind smile, He spoke softly, as though he didn't want to disturb the peaceful atmosphere of the room. "Your music is extraordinary," he said, his voice calm and confident. "You have a gift, and I can see that it's something you've worked hard for." Claire blushed at the compliment, her hand still resting lightly on the piano. "Thank you," she replied, unsure of how to respond. "I've always loved music," the man nodded. "It's clear. You play with such feeling. It's rare to hear someone connect with the music in the way you do." Claire shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze dropping to the keys. "I never thought much of it," she said quietly. "I just play because it makes me happy." He smiled warmly. "That's exactly why it works. The music is real. It comes from the heart, but it's also clear to me that you could be doing so much more with it. You could take this further." Claire didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure what he meant. She had been content playing at the restaurant, sharing her music with the guests who came and went. But the idea of doing more, of stepping into the spotlight in a way that felt so foreign to her, made her uneasy. The man continued, "I'm in the business of finding talent, and I think you have something special. If you're open to it, I would like to offer you the chance to take your music to a wider audience." Claire's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I work with a variety of artists," the man explained, "and I believe your music has the potential to reach people beyond this restaurant. I'm offering you the chance to perform at venues, to record your music, and to truly explore what you're capable of." Claire was taken aback. She had never even considered the possibility of turning her passion into a career. She had always kept it as a personal part of herself, something private and separate from the world around her. The idea of performing professionally, of making her music something more than just a hobby, was both exciting and terrifying. I don't know," Claire said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've never done anything like that. I'm just a waitress who plays piano in her spare time. I don't have the experience." The man smiled again, as though he had anticipated her hesitation. "It's not about experience. It's about raw talent. What you've already done here, in front of these guests, speaks volumes. You have the potential to go much further than this." It's all about taking that next step. Claire's mind was racing. She couldn't deny that the idea of performing professionally appealed to her. But there was also the fear of failure, the fear that she might not be good enough, that she might not belong in that world. She had spent so much of her life hiding her talent, keeping it to herself, that the thought of putting herself out there in front of a larger audience felt almost impossible. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this was her chance, the chance to stop hiding, to stop living in the shadows of other people's expectations. Maybe it was time to take a leap of faith, to step into a future that she had never allowed herself to dream of. "I'll think about it," Claire said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "I need some time to process all of this." The man nodded, understanding. "Take all the time you need. But remember, this opportunity won't wait forever." As he left the restaurant that night, Claire sat at the piano for a long while, her mind swirling with thoughts and possibilities. She had always loved music, but could she really do this? Could she turn it into something more than just a dream? The next few days were filled with reflection. Claire went about her usual routine at the restaurant, but her mind was never fully present. Every time she sat down to play, she found herself wondering what it would be like to perform on a bigger stage, to share her music with a wider audience. It was a thrilling thought, but also a daunting one. On the fourth night after the man's offer, Claire made a decision. She would take the opportunity. She wasn't sure where it would lead or how she would get there, but she knew she couldn't keep holding herself back. Music was her passion, and if there was even a chance to share it with the world, she had to try. The next day, Claire called the man and told him that she was ready to take the next step. He was pleased, and arrangements were made for her to perform at a small venue in the city. It wasn't a grand stage, but it was a start. It was the first step towards something she had never imagined could happen. As the day of her first performance approached, Claire's nerves returned in full force. The thought of standing in front of an audience playing her own music felt overwhelming. But she also knew that this was what she had been waiting for. She had always dreamed of sharing her music with the world, and now she was about to do it. On the night of her first performance, she stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. The small venue was packed, the audience filled with eager faces. Claire could hear the murmur of conversation as the crowd awaited the performance, and she felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She wasn't ready for this, but she had to be. When it was finally her turn, she stepped onto the stage, the spotlight shining down on her. The room fell silent. She took a deep breath, seated herself at the piano, and began to play. The first notes were shaky, uncertain, but as she continued, her confidence began to grow. The music flowed through her just like it always had. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that, Claire realized, was all that mattered. The audience listened intently, their eyes fixed on her. Claire poured everything she had into the music, letting it speak for her, letting it tell her story in a way that words never could. When the last note faded, the room was silent. Claire sat there for a moment, waiting for something, anything to happen. And then, as if on cue, the applause erupted. It wasn't thunderous, but it was sincere. The crowd had been moved, and Claire knew that she had taken the first step toward something bigger than she had ever imagined. The applause from Claire's first public performance lingered in the air, a sound that filled her with an unfamiliar sense of pride. It wasn't the loud, overwhelming applause she had imagined when dreaming of performing on a grand stage, but it was genuine. The people who had been listening weren't clapping out of politeness, they had felt something. And that was all that mattered. She sat there, her fingers resting lightly on the piano keys, taking in the moment. The feeling of performing, of sharing a piece of herself through music, was something she had never fully experienced before. It wasn't just about playing for an audience. It was about making a connection, about telling a story without words. She had spent so many years hiding behind her uniform at the restaurant, blending into the background, never allowing herself to truly be seen. But now, on this small stage, she had stepped into the light. After the performance, Claire stepped down from the stage, her heart still racing. She was met with smiles and congratulations from the people in the audience, many of whom had come up to her afterward to thank her. There were even a few who asked if she would be performing again, expressing their admiration for her talent. Claire felt a mix of emotions, excitement, disbelief, and something that felt like fulfillment. She had taken a risk, a leap into the unknown, and it had paid off. The experience was nothing like she had imagined. It was real, raw, and personal. The way the audience had reacted to her music showed her something she had never truly believed: that her passion could resonate with others, that her story could be shared through the sound of the piano. But the journey was far from over. Over the next few months, Claire's performances became more frequent. She was no longer just the woman playing in the corner of a restaurant. She was a pianist, an artist in her own right. The small venue where she had first performed became her home base, and the more she played, the more her confidence grew. She began to experiment with new pieces, exploring different styles, and even composing her own music. Every performance was a step forward, each note she played bringing her closer to understanding her true self as an artist. The audience reactions varied. Some were moved by the delicate, introspective pieces, while others seemed to connect more with the upbeat, lively compositions she had started incorporating into her sets. Claire had learned to embrace the diversity of her audience, realizing that music was a universal language that spoke to everyone in different ways. The most important thing she realized was that she was speaking from the heart. Claire's reputation as a pianist began to spread, and soon she was offered opportunities to perform at larger venues. The invitations came from event organizers, local businesses, and even small theaters that were looking for a fresh, authentic sound. Each time she was offered a new performance, Claire felt both excited and nervous. The bigger the stage, the higher the stakes. But she had grown used to the feeling of uncertainty, learning to embrace it rather than shy away from it. Every performance, whether big or small, taught her something new. Despite the growing recognition, Claire stayed humble. She never allowed herself to forget where she came from. She knew what it was like to work in the background, to be unnoticed, to feel like just another person in the crowd, and that understanding kept her grounded. She still worked at the restaurant, performing after her shifts, and was always quick to thank the staff who helped set up for her performances. Claire never wanted to lose touch with the person she had been, the woman who had once felt invisible. It was that part of her that made her music so relatable to others. But there was still one thing that weighed heavily on her mind: her future. While Claire had found success in her local performances, She was beginning to wonder what came next. She had always been content with taking small steps, but now, with each new opportunity that came her way, she found herself thinking about the bigger picture. Could she truly make a career out of this? Was it time to stop holding back and take the next big step? One evening, after a particularly well-received performance, Claire sat alone in the small dressing room at the back of the venue, her mind racing with questions. She had just finished playing a piece she had composed herself, one that felt like a reflection of everything she had gone through in her life, every doubt, every triumph, every quiet moment of clarity. The applause had been louder than usual, and for the first time Claire felt like she truly belonged in the world she had once felt so distant from. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. The manager of the venue, a man who had supported her from the very beginning, poked his head inside. "Mind if I come in?" he asked with a smile. "Of course," Claire replied, standing up to greet him. He walked in and closed the door behind him, his expression thoughtful. "That was incredible," he said, his voice sincere. "I've seen a lot of performers, but there's something different about you. People really connect with your music. You're not just playing songs, you're telling stories." Claire smiled, grateful for his kind words. "Thanks. I guess that's what it feels like, telling stories through the music." The manager nodded, then hesitated before continuing. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something. We've had some discussions about your potential. The truth is, there are people who are interested in you, people who can help you take this to the next level." Claire's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "There are record labels, music producers, and venues that have been following your performances. They see the same thing I see, a raw, genuine talent that has the potential to go far. They've offered to work with you to help you take your music to a wider audience." Claire felt her breath catch in her throat. She had always dreamed of something like this, but hearing it spoken out loud made it feel so real, so tangible. "Are you saying a record deal?" The manager nodded. "Exactly. But it's not just about a record deal. It's about the opportunity to grow, to reach people who haven't heard your music yet. You could tour, perform in larger venues, even record an album. The question is, are you ready for that kind of change?" Claire felt overwhelmed. Her mind raced as she considered everything, the chance to travel, to meet new people, to share her music with the world. But with it came the uncertainty of leaving behind the comfort of what she knew. It wasn't just about the stage. It was about stepping into a new life, one that was full of unknowns. "I'm not sure," Claire admitted, her voice shaky. "I've always kept things small, kept them to myself." "This is big," the manager smiled gently. "I get it. It's a huge decision, but I believe in you, Claire. I believe in your music, and I think the world is ready to hear it." Claire sat in silence, her thoughts swirling. She had always kept her dreams close to her chest, afraid to believe in them fully. But now, standing on the precipice of something bigger than she had ever imagined, she realized that she had the power to decide her own future. It wasn't about being afraid of failure. It was about trusting herself and her music. It was time to take the leap. After a long pause, Claire looked up at the manager. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "I'm ready to see where this takes me." The manager's face broke into a wide grin. "That's the spirit. Let's do this." Over the next few months, Claire's life changed in ways she had never expected. With the support of the manager and the offers from record labels, she began to record her music professionally, capturing the raw emotion and authenticity that had first made her stand out. She performed in larger venues, toured across the country, and shared her story with thousands of people who resonated with her music. She was no longer just the quiet waitress. She was an artist, a storyteller whose music touched the hearts of everyone who heard it. And through it all, Claire remained true to herself. She never lost sight of where she had come from, of the woman who had once been invisible. Instead, she used her experiences, her struggles, and her dreams to fuel the music that had brought her to this point. In the end, Claire realized that her journey had never been about the destination. It had always been about the music. And by embracing that, she had found a place in the world where she truly belonged.